So thank you all for coming out for the Great Minds Alumni breakout sessions. So I'm here to introduce our speaker, who is an alumnus of IMSA from before I was here, so I didn't get to teach him. His life story is really fascinating and very long. Or not long, but has a lot of different countries involved. So I'm not going to attempt to do that. He says he's going to cover it. So let me just pass this right along and introduce you to your speaker, Stephen Paige.
So my name is Stephen Paige. So the topic of what I'm talking about, why the need for innovation is stronger than ever. Get to a couple aspects. So a little of my background. So I was class of 2000 here at IMSA. Not too much has changed, surprisingly, as I walked around. I ended up, after leaving IMSA, I went to the Air Force Academy for about 2 years. Changed a bit my career path, what I wanted to do. So came back and went to the University of Illinois. Got a bachelor's degree in theoretical and applied mechanics and master's in aerospace engineering. I finished that up and decided I really didn't want to do either of those two things. So I ended up getting a job with a company called Schlumberger. It's a U.S. company that works as a service company in the oil industry to help companies drill oil and gas wells. And I started out in Russia, working with other countries throughout Eastern Europe, and I'll show all of them in a second. And that was for about 4 years, 2005 to 2008. And then after that, I got married, and my wife and I decided to work for Shell. And I did that originally in the Netherlands, then the United Kingdom, and more recently Ukraine. I've been there for almost exactly 4 years this month. So a little bit on, here's a nice map of Europe. And that's in 2005 is when I moved, and this was to Russia in western Siberia. So it's about a 4-hour flight east of Moscow. So really quite in the middle of essentially nowhere. And I was there for about a year and a half. From Russia, I moved to Romania. And I was in Romania initially just for a few months before I moved from Romania to the eastern part of Ukraine. And I was there for about 3 or 4 months before I moved down to Bulgaria. And I was in Bulgaria for a few months before I went to Germany. And I was in Germany for about 6 months before I moved from Germany down to Georgia. And this was, I don't know if anyone recalls, but this was in the middle part of 2008 when there was an armed conflict between Russia and Georgia. And I was essentially there at the time this was all happening up on the northern border of Georgia. So it was quite interesting to be there. And certainly the technical aspects were interesting. From Georgia, given the risk issues that we had in place, we ended up moving to Turkey for another project. Turkey, I went back to Romania, where I was for about a year. And then this is my last assignment with Schlumberger. From Romania, I moved to the Netherlands. I was in the Netherlands for about 4 years. And now I split my time between London in the UK and Kiev in the Ukraine. So I'm working in Kiev, and this is a new project Shell has started, trying to find natural gas in the Ukraine. So they're very dependent currently on Russia for providing almost all of their hydrocarbon needs. And they're trying to gain, the U.S. talks about a lot of energy independence, but it's something in many countries that's very important. They have the capability of doing that, but they need the technology and the expertise, which they simply don't have. They have a very long history. They were a major supplier of Russia during World War II of oil, but they simply need to get the technology to be able to supply what they need now, particularly from a natural gas standpoint. So yeah, what is innovation in here? So I'll cover a bit on what innovation is. And I have a few quotes. And the first one I have is one here from Steve Jobs. And that says, innovation is what distinguishes a leader and a follower. And this is very important, and it comes up a bit in what I'm going to talk about here. But this really is, if you can understand this, you really start to understand what is innovation. And it's that. It's being a leader. It's not necessarily being a manager, but it's leading instead of just following the man.
Stephen, do you mind using that?
Yeah, no problem.
There's some noise from the little cat.
Okay.
Thank you.
Yep. Okay, so what is innovation again? And kind of the old idea was that innovation is creativity. If you're going to be creative, then you're innovating, and creativity is just creating new ideas and creating knowledge. And that's all there was to it. If you could do that, you will be successful as a person, as a company, as a country. But frankly, that's incorrect. That's just being creative. Creative in and of itself does not make you successful. And what innovation is taking that creativity and implementing whatever you're trying to do. And that is the challenging thing. Lots of people can be creative, lots of people can figure out what they need to do, but it's figuring the process of implementing that. And that can be many, many things. Implementing creativity from something you do on yourself is a lot different from what a company needs to do when they innovate a new product and deliver it to market, for instance. So this is really the most important equation of innovation, is understanding that it's really developing an idea, but then implementing that idea. And so a bit more into that. So new ideas, you create lots of new ideas, and that's being creative. But it's taking those ideas and turning them into something of value. And again, this could be monetary value, but it could be any other sort of value. It could be time saving, it could be whatnot. And that is where we start to reach this innovation, is turning those ideas to value. And really being even more specific in the innovation, it's separating from innovation, it's nonlinear innovation. So often companies, particularly in the past, have been very good at innovating. And they've been good in essentially what would be improvement in what they do. And that's not what needs to be done. It's this nonlinear innovation. It's non-obvious, it's non-incremental. And it's what often is talked about in kind of presentations about innovation. It's radical. It's being radical in what you do, looking at a problem from a completely different perspective. And that's how you can end up being successful. And what that does is it gives you long-term value and it creates wealth. And this is what, as a country, the U.S. needs to do, but in general, the world, what the world has to do to continue improving itself. So what is that? I have some companies that are innovators here. And this is, at least from Forbes' perspective, this is what they call the most innovative companies at the moment. So companies like, I think everyone knows Google and Apple, AMD, kind of the top of the tech companies. And then some other non-technical companies, FedEx, Target. These are companies that have, particularly more recently, reinvented themselves and are considered to be very innovative in what they do. And then there's companies that are on the other side, that are simply, they're not innovative. And these are companies more recently. Compare something like FedEx and the U.S. Postal Service. They're simply on different paths. And if they can't, if these companies cannot deviate from what they're on, they may continue to exist, but they will not be successful companies. And that's what, you want to embody these companies, both in your own life, but also, these are the companies people, when they start getting into the workforce, these are the companies they want to work for, because they're known as innovators. They're the type of companies you want to be with. What is different today, and why is innovation now becoming necessary? And this is it's actually a quote from Michael Bloomberg, and this was in the late 90s, but it's very much applicable today. So, and what he said is, what's likely to kill you in the new economy is not someone doing something better, it's that someone's doing something different. And this is what innovation is about. It's not improving in a linear path, doing something better every year, improving what you do. It's actually completely changing the rules of what you're doing. And this is what innovation is about, why it's so important today to be innovative, that you can figure out there's something different to essentially get a leg up. So this is specifically talking about manufacturing, and this is the most recent data that the UN has, and this is manufacturing output. You can see in billions of dollars, so the top there is $2 trillion a year. And a lot of people think it actually happened previously, but in 2010, which is the most recent data that's been released, is that China has now surpassed the US as the top manufacturing country in the world. And this is not something that's likely to change and go back. This is not, it's simply a case of the economics and of the situation in a specific country of why it's where it's at. But the important thing to understand here is for the US, this number of about $1.8 trillion, it's about 13% of the total US gross domestic product. Whereas in China, manufacturing is over 33% of their GDP. So while this on its own is no problem, it's the innovation that continues to drive the US. And moving forward, we need to continue doing that. And countries as a whole, this isn't just the US needs to improve versus other countries, but this is what allows countries to grow and improve themselves. In the past, continuous improvement, this concept of improving what you're doing, is what was viewed as being successful. But really, this has all changed. With the access to information and with the global economy itself, the rules of the game that's being played kind of on a worldwide level have changed. And if you don't adapt, then you'll simply fall. One of these companies on the right side chart, you won't be innovative, and you cannot continue to be successful. So I have a few quotes here, mostly from kind of innovation specialists, but kind of continues on what I just mentioned. So is that most companies are built for continuous improvement rather than discontinuous innovation. And that's the biggest difference between the two, is that improvement is continuous while innovation is discontinuous. It is lateral improvement. So they know how to get better, but they don't know how to get different. And this is what, not just companies, this also applies to individuals, to yourself as you move forward, as you are successful, whatever career path you do. It could be engineering like I do, but it's any sort of career path. Is that being innovative will allow you to be different and surpass what your fellow, essentially the people you're trying to compete with. Yeah, another thing, and this is probably the top innovation guru worldwide. So every organization has to prepare for the abandonment of everything it does. And this is some companies, particularly those that are very innovative, are good at this. Is that everything they do, they're reinventing on every few years. A company like 3M is known that every 4 years, over 50% of their revenue is coming from new things that have been developed in those 4 years. So they're not simply sitting by and allowing what is currently working to deliver what they need. And finally, I think it goes without saying, but innovation is fundamental to the growth, fundamental to the quest for a profitable, sustainable growth. I don't really need to go into the details, but it's clear that innovation is what gives this profitable growth. And whether you're talking on an individual basis or on a company-wide basis, this is quite important. So there was a survey that was done by McKinsey, it was about 4 years ago, and across the board, all the countries in the US and Europe, this was done on a company, so companies were surveyed this, but in all these countries, innovation was ranked as the most important criterion for future success. So it's really important that it's not something that can be taught, can be told, but by practicing, it's something that you can improve and will give you that success on your personal. The thing that starts coming up is that innovation can be very challenging for large companies. I end up working for a very large company. Shell has 80,000 employees worldwide. It can be very difficult for companies like this to be innovative. They have requirements in place, whether that's regulatory or their own internal requirements, that make being innovative and working outside the normal scope of things can make it very challenging. And something that was said by, this was the CEO of GE, Jack Welch, he said that, so for him, is whether or not big companies can attract the right talent. He said to break the glass. And when he talks about break the glass, it's you end up in this mold, and you have to continually be breaking out. You have to break the company regularly in order to be innovative. Because if you're not, as I said, you get left behind by companies that have innovations. And it really comes down to a risk reward. It can be difficult for smaller companies to do this, to be innovative, whereas the reward is quite sizable. So oftentimes, innovation can come from large companies, but if smaller companies are willing to take the chance, they often have this. They have this correct talent that they can do so. They can be more willing to take this chance. So yeah, why do we need to innovate? I like the quote, unfortunately. Steve Kang, he was a vice president of Enron, but he still had a good quote. And if you look back in 1999 and 2000, Enron was the top innovative company in the United States. They were considered as one of the top. Now, they had separate issues, and greed ended up being their downfall. But nonetheless, they really had that and what he said is this is what rang through. He said innovation is at the heart of sustaining competitive advantage. And this is what's very important. And if companies and individuals are able to do this, then they will be able to continue to be at the top, to be to have the competitive advantage over their competitors. Yeah, a number of reasons why we need to innovate. And it really, I mentioned before, but certainly economic growth. And I've said many times, this could be on an individual basis, this could be a company, this could be on a country, or even just globally. But it's very important that innovation is what drove the Industrial Revolution. And it's these sort of things going forward, looking at renewable energy sources, looking at general industrial improvement is what innovation is really will drive this economic growth. Competitive advantage. I mean, you can look at companies that really gained this competitive advantage. If you look at Michelin tires, they were not much of a company, but they developed the radial tire. And with the radial tire, they became the top company in tire manufacturing. And this is what you need to do. Sony developed many years ago the Walkman, and they became the company. And for a while, they were the only company. And these are the sort of things you can look at what Google did. When I was here at IMSA, I was sitting at the door, and I was searching on Alta Vista. I don't know if people know what this is, but that was the cool company. That's what everyone's using. Now, people hardly use anything but Google, and this is what Google has done. They found a competitive advantage, and companies cease to exist because of what they did. And if you can't keep up, this is why it's absolutely necessary. This equation is easy. So again, this is your own self, this is a company one. Profit is revenue minus cost. For a long time, engineers have gotten very good at this cost estimate. They've reduced this cost. They've done things more efficiently. They've reduced the cost of manufacturing. They've used cheaper materials. We're really getting to the point where this cost cannot be significantly reduced in lots of things. So what you need to do is, if you want to improve profit, if you want to make more money for yourself, is you need to figure out how to improve this revenue. We've already minimized the cost. And that's by making something better, being innovative, thinking not just how do I improve something, how do I make something cheaper. It's how do I actually make a new product that people want. Yeah, to improve performance. I talked about it a bit, but being efficient is a large aspect of what being innovative is about. And it's quite important. And taking advantage of opportunity. One good example I've always liked, and that's kind of the oil industry that I worked in. For a long time, companies, so they come along, they wouldn't know if oil or gas would be in a certain location. And you drill a hole in the ground and you see, is there oil there? And if there wasn't, then you can drill another hole. Is there oil there? And they eventually got to the point where they saw, in a lot of cases, they were drilling. There wasn't oil, but there was natural gas. And for a long, long time, that was not what they were looking for. And they started realizing, well, we have an opportunity, why not make use of it? They did have something of value down there. It wasn't what they were looking for, but it was still something of value. And then by monetizing this opportunity of producing natural gas instead of producing crude oil, they really were able to innovate and make a new industry, which now today the U.S. is at a surplus of natural gas. Yeah, business and economic survival. This is, if you don't innovate, you're going to be the next Alta Vista, and you're going to simply cease to exist. And this can be in anything. This is going to be companies you're going to work for. This is you as an individual when it comes to applying for that ideal job you want out of university. But this is very important. You need to be innovative so you can be the one left at the end. So, a few topics. So the speed of technology, and again, why is it necessary today? It's because the speed of technology is becoming so quick that you can't be reactive anymore. If you're simply reactive whenever a new technology comes on the market, you start really losing your competitiveness. You can't compete against what the companies that are already being proactive to what the technology is changing. Compete with the companies that bring about those changes. And the global economy. And the fact is, basic engineering has become a commodity. You can trade it, you can sell it, you can go to a company in another country and say, do this sort of engineering for me. So, that creates a value on one hand, but on the other hand, a lot of these simple type of non-innovative improvements are being sent elsewhere. So for you as an individual, if you want to be working in engineering, working in science, technology, engineering, any of these, it's is that you need to figure out how to be innovative, how to be something that cannot be exploited, cannot be sent to someone else to simply do. And that's where innovation really comes in. And like I said, it's what ensures you a place in the future. I mean, if you can't figure out how to innovate, your companies or the whole country can't figure out this innovation, then you'll slowly be left on the side as people who can, will continue to innovate. There are people out there, there will always be people out there. So you simply need to be at the top of this. So how to be an innovator? And so Andy Grove, so he was the CEO of Intel, and took the company, I believe over 11 years, he grew the company about 5,000%. So he was a very successful, probably one of the most successful U.S. CEOs. And he had a great company. Only the paranoid will survive. And this was talking about innovation, talking about he always understood. And Intel was a classic example of a company that they would release a product, and when they were releasing, they were already working on the product that would make their own product last generation. And this is a company, they know if they sit by and say, well, we have the top processor in the world, then someone else would come along and pass it on. So they were always innovating, and they always had to be paranoid about what was around the corner, what are other companies going to come up with. So there's really three main individuals in the innovation process, and that can be whether you're at a school, you're at a company or whatnot, and that's the creative geniuses. And this, of course, genius is a bit of a dangerous term, but this is what's often used. And what we're talking about here is individuals that can see things differently. They can gain some insight, and they need to have this to overcome bureaucracy, to see beyond the conventional. And that's this simple aspect of looking at things differently, looking at things from the side instead of as everyone does from the bottom. And so then they find these creative insights, and they can turn those insights, what needs to be done, into innovation. But often a creative genius, on its own, it's very difficult for an individual on a large scale to create massive innovation. So there's two people behind them. The first is an innovation champion. Say IMSA is very good, that there's many teachers, there's many people on the SIR program that you work with that are these champions. They're going to support and promote your drive towards innovation and the project you want to be working on. And these are the first line. When you think of these creative insights, these are the people you go to. And then finally, the innovation leader. And this is both kind of IMSA as a whole, but then the administration level. And they're influencing the organization, giving support to these innovation champions, support the drive for innovation. And you can see this whether that you end up working for a 10-person company or an 80,000-person company. These individuals, it's always clear to them. So creative geniuses will be found throughout an organization, and whether that's a public organization, a private company, that it will be everywhere. But then it's these innovation champions and leaders that you need to find and gain their support to work towards that. This is very critical here. So a couple other concepts or quotes. So you always have to prepare to be wrong. This is something that's very important. If you're not able to, if you're not okay with being wrong, which in the experience I have in working in another number of companies around the world, many cultures, this is a big issue, is allowing people to be wrong. And I feel the U.S., this is something that the U.S. does well, that being one wrong, that trying and being unsuccessful is okay. Because if you're not prepared to be wrong, you'll never be able to come up with something original. Because innovation is about trying again and again, failing again and again, until you find something that works. And kind of one of my favorites, and it's talking about creativity, but it applies equally to innovation. It's that you don't grow into creativity, you grow out of it. So everyone, when they're born, they're very creative. They think of imaginary friends and whatnot. Everyone's creative. You have to figure out how to stay creative your whole life. Because if you sit back and let it pass, you will grow out of this creativity, and you will end up in kind of the same path that everyone expects you to be. So how to innovate? There's a number of main requirements. So first, you have to believe. There's three things that come out of innovation, I guess I would say, is that you can combine insight with knowledge, and that will create new knowledge. And then if you would combine that same insight with new knowledge that you've now created, you create new products. And then finally, if you take the insight that you have with existing ways of work and existing product, you can increase this effectiveness. And these three main items, taking your own insight, this innovation genius, and if you can do these three things, take your own insight with knowledge, the new knowledge you make, and the existing way of working, you really get really, this is the, I guess, the circle, the continual loop of how innovation happens. And the first thing you need to do is need finding. So find something that needs to be improved, something you need to innovate on. And once you're aware of what you're talking about, you think you have something that potentially is could stand an innovation, is you can frame this topic. And you figure out, okay, what needs to be done? What are the scope? And everything that you're talking about in this specific need that you want to improve in. And then you take your creativity and your insight and combine it into that need and the frame that you've done. And then finally out of that is prototyping. And this could be physically making a new object, but it could also figuring out the process you're going to apply in your own innovation, whether that's in your efficiency of how you do things in your day-to-day life. It could be being innovative in how you get yourself from home to the grocery store. It could be anything. And I put this up here. There are a number of kind of points that differentiate between a conventional culture and an innovative culture. And often people are expected and people desire that everyone will fit into a conventional culture. They want people to be predictable. Whereas to be innovative, you need to be the opposite. You need to be completely unpredictable in how you think about a problem. If someone tells you to solve a solution to a problem, don't think about it like they explain, like they expect it to. Come about it from a completely different perspective. Conventional cultures, and this is specifically at a corporate type sense, is they expect high success rates. Failure is not an attractive outcome. And I think everyone can understand that. But you cannot be innovative if you cannot accept failure. If you can't, this whole point, if you can't be wrong, you cannot think up with original and new ideas. Hierarchy. For conventional cultures, hierarchy is very important. You end up with very rigid structures. But in innovation, that doesn't work. Because if someone is your boss and your boss's boss and they tell you to do X, you do X. It's not acceptable that you go and, well, I'm going to try something else. And you see very innovative cultures like Google is known that they have their employees, they give them 20% of the time to do whatever they want. They're not told what to do. And this is really what you reinforce these networks, allow people to work with whatever teams and whatever projects that drives them and inspires them. Conventional culture is this concept of avoiding surprises, where in fact in innovation you should really embrace surprises. Surprises are what gives us this predictableness, the new insights that allow innovation to happen. Conventional cultures, they measure stability and look for clarity. Again, you want to be the exact opposite. You want to measure innovation. Don't worry about the stability in an organization. This is particularly in very large organizations. They want this. They want stability in whether it's profits, revenues coming in. But it's really the innovation that should be more important. And the thrive in ambiguity. Clarity is not important. It's understanding that in ambiguity, there's an outcome that is this innovation to work. Avoiding change. Where clearly, if you avoid change, innovation is simply not possible. You need to embrace it. And often people consider conventional type cultures very easy to work with, but that can be nice. But to be innovative, to be successful at the end of the day, it could be very hard to work with innovative cultures and innovative projects. But it's in my viewpoint, it's so much more rewarding when you follow them. And then finally, conventional cultures. They are the status quo. They extend the status quo. And innovation, you need to abandon it. You need to come up with a new status quo. You need to be constantly changing what you consider to be the norm. So on the call for innovation, innovation is never easy. It's certainly not easy, but you need to do it on a consistent basis. Innovation is not a new idea. It's consistent stream of new ideas and new concepts. It's absolutely mandatory for supply. Companies to be successful, individuals to be very successful, they need to be innovative. And anyone at any level in any organization can be innovative. And process and attitudes. And this is, again, at many levels. And this is, the supporters of innovation and the people who are actually implementing it. These processes and attitudes are what allow innovation to thrive across the board. And practice. And it's something that, for me, is what made IMSA probably most rewarding for me, is that you need effective practice to allow an innovation culture to thrive. And now I'm talking about this again. This is a personal standpoint. IMSA is a great opportunity because it is okay at times to fail. You can try something, and if it doesn't work out, then you can change your perspective. You can try it from another angle. And this is what is very important. To get to innovation, you need to practice, you need to try. Innovation is found by many failures time and again until you finally find something that works. That's it.
Great. So, we actually have a little time left over. Yeah. Okay. So we have questions. Yes, for our speaker. Go ahead.
When you were in Europe and you lived in all those countries, did you pick up any of the languages, or which ones did you pick up?
I've been asked a few times today. So I'm particularly bad at languages. Yeah. So I speak Russian fairly well. I was in Russia originally for about 2 years, and in Ukraine, it's quite an odd country. Everyone speaks Russian, but they write in Ukraine. They're actually two different languages. But I can get by in Russian quite well. I can certainly read, so the Cyrillic alphabet is very easy to read. I can pick up a book and I could read all day long. I don't know what I'm saying, but it's very easy to read. But I certainly can follow quite well. And I've been in the Netherlands for about 4 years, and Dutch is kind of, I studied German here, and Dutch is kind of 50% German, 50% English. And my wife's from Mexico, so I speak Spanish. So I kind of English, Spanish, and 50% Dutch, 50% Russian.
Very fascinating presentation, especially the perspective you bring. Here's the challenge. A young engineer joins the organization. He's got all these beautiful ideas. But you have the old dogs who don't want to change anything. What are some advice you have for the organization and some organization? Advice for the engineer, the young engineer?
Yeah, I mean, it's a challenging thing. And I've been in situations, I've been lucky that I feel both the companies I've worked for are quite innovative in what they do. And there is the corporate culture that does encourage it.
Change without change.
Yeah, but and there were times when that wasn't always the case. It can be quite difficult. And I saw I watched a lecture once, and it was from Jack Welch, so the CEO of GE. And he said that when he was about 6 years in GE, he was about ready to quit the company. He ended up being the CEO for about 11 years. And he went to me and said, nothing is changing. Everything is so rigid. And he ended up finding a mentor, and that's something for me that's so important. And this could be a mentor. I talked about one in the classes before. If you're not sure what university, what program you want to major in university, find a mentor, and that could be a teacher here, that could be someone you can talk to, one of the counselors here. And once you get into university, if you're not sure what you want to do, it's finding an academic advisor. And then once I got to the corporate level, that's what was very important for me, was finding a mentor. It's very easy to see the people who support innovation. And these are the individuals I went to. And they can understand, although a company could be quite innovative and encourage innovation, it's not always the case that it's clear how the process, how you need to go about it. And that's what I've found, is finding a mentor, find someone who really supports that process. It makes it so much more easier, but also rewarding. And that,
What was your favorite thing about IMSA?
I think for me, so before I came to IMSA, school was never particularly challenging and all that boring, but for me, it's the teachers. It's no question. I mean, you run into teachers that perhaps can be a bit challenging and may not be your favorite, but all the teachers, I feel, and IMSA has made me, particularly from a standpoint of this, innovation, my drive to learn, and my understanding how to learn, is they made that possible. They always have that drive to, they're not just teaching to a test, they're not just teaching to get the student out to meet to the next year. They're always trying to improve the students. And I mean, probably certainly not here, but now when I look back, there's no question. It's the teachers and what they provide, which is more than, I mean, I was in McDonald's modern physics, and I mean, talking about something that I never do in my day job. And I can see that how quantum mechanics, how understanding quantum mechanics helps to learn how to learn. And that's what's important. And it doesn't matter what you do. It doesn't matter if you go into engineering or technology, or if you go into politics or whatever you do. It's learning how to learn and then applying that whatever you do in your life. Because I ended up studying something and working with something completely different. But what I've learned is how to learn and how to adapt to change. And I have no question I could go into a completely different industry and still thrive in that.
It seems like you just said, you studied something in school that ended up being rather different than what you're actually working with now. So how do you think you made that leap? And did you do anything special to make the leap?
Again, I think the most important thing was me figuring out how to learn. And it's something I did primarily at IMSA. But being able to easily jump from one career to the other. But it's also a bit the specifics of what I'm doing. I mean, if you're going to get hired to go and code for Google, they're not going to take someone with a history degree that has no coding background. But engineering is very nice, particularly because for me working with petroleum engineering, there are a number of other third world countries. Petroleum engineering is quite a large degree focus, but it's not in the U.S. There's about 3 or 4 programs U.S.-wide that have petroleum engineers, and they don't put out maybe 10% of what the industry does. So I also was in an industry, the oil industry, that accepts they cannot only hire petroleum engineers. They need to train their people. But what they're looking for is the best technical individuals. And I've worked with people who study physics, they study math, they study nuclear engineering, and they all have that understanding how to apply what they see and the work they do to finding a solution. And a lot of it is what I do, but I don't have a question. I could also go to something completely different. I could go and work for Caterpillar design a tractor, because I understand what is the end goal and can figure out how to get the process there. And it's that technical background, but then also the capability to innovate.
I have a question. In light of what you said about innovation, do you have any thoughts on how IMSA is doing sort of educational innovation? Do you think we're staying? I mean, I know you don't know everything about the school, but
yeah. I think. Yeah, I think there's a lot of aspects to it. I mean, certainly when I was here, it's not something that's in existence anymore. But they were doing innovation. In my year, when I first came here in 1998, they did integrated science. I was explaining to someone before, but they had 2 different programs. They took half the sophomores in my class, and they put them in a conventional science program. They would go once a week to chemistry, once a week to biology, once a week to physics. And then we had an integrated science. And they took all of one classroom, and we ended up spending, I believe it was 9 hours a week together doing all sciences. So they did all integrated science, and they were able to figure out, is this a process that works? Because there's so much interaction between when you start talking about chemistry, when you start talking about physics, and what the interaction is when you get into biology. So these sort of things were, they tried this. And I think these sort of things are what makes it possible. And you can really see the innovation at, when I was talking to Mark, the things that they started doing in his class back in 1992, and the things that are frankly becoming US-wide a common practice. And these are the things that I think IMSA does very well. And at times, I think as a student, you don't even notice what the process is in the background. But you're part of a lab that's being used across the state and even across the country and the world. And it is, when you look back on it, a bit exciting to be involved in the process.
Excuse me if you've mentioned this before, but what is the exact project you're working on currently?
So it is it's a large scale. So we're currently doing exploration of a very large area. It's about an area of say 100 miles by 100 miles square, and we are in the process of exploring and finding out if they can economically produce natural gas. So we're drilling wells and we're stimulating them such to see if an economic quantity of gas can come out of the ground. And it's from a technical aspect, it's not particularly challenging. It's very similar to what's been done in the U.S. for decades now. But it's a lot of other, for me, non-technical challenges. It's working with the government and the regulators that are in place in Ukraine. Because these are things that they haven't done before. They want to do it. They want to get this energy independence. But that doesn't always, in very bureaucratic countries, that doesn't always ring fully across the board. That although there's a drive from the top, that doesn't mean everyone you will deal with will have that same top priority. So it's those sort of things that I work with, working with environmental regulators, working with technical regulators, to get this project to see if we can, at the end of the day, Shell expects that they'll produce as much, essentially about 5 to 10% of their total worldwide production in the country of Ukraine, about 10 to 15. So it could potentially be very big for them. But yeah, they need to check and see first if it's
You say that with innovation comes a lot of risk. And some of the more innovative companies are more volatile. For example, Silicon Valley, for every one Google that comes out, there are several that fail in bankruptcy. Is there a balance, or can there be a balance between the innovation and the stability that some of the older models of business provide?
I think there are. Again, it comes down to a lot. Is you need to fail many times to find something that works. Now, do we need to have 20 failures? I wouldn't even say 20 failures for one Google. I mean, it's 10,000, 20,000 failures for Google. But do we need to have 1,000 failures for a successful company? Well, I mean, it's very difficult. Big companies can at times be successful in innovators. And large companies, they end up putting processes in place. They can be innovative while still having process to make sure they're not, you don't want to risk your whole company to yes, there's a very nice reward at the end of the day, but you still need to keep that in place. But it's very difficult for large companies because they need to continue to be innovating, and that means they need to innovate their own internal policies, which can be very challenging for large companies to do. So, for me, I find it rewarding because there's always resistance when I come up with a new idea or I want to do something different. And I find it rewarding when I can take that through a big company like Shell to fruition. But on the other hand, it can be difficult at times with small companies because they might not have the resources necessary. But it's finding that balance. And for some people, it could be they enjoy being in that small company because they can help to influence the culture. I certainly can't change the culture on my own of Shell. I can change the culture and the team I'm working in, what I do. But it's really up to the individual, and that's part of when you start looking at the end of the university, you start looking for the company you want to work for, is finding that right type of company. Part of that is the size of the company, because there's large Google innovative companies, and there's much smaller innovative companies, and it just depends on the individual where you will thrive the most. But certainly there needs to be failure to find that type of innovative success. But yeah, I mean, it's certainly not easy to say there's going to need to be 10,000 failures for Google, but that's something. Yes, I mean that's the nature of about innovation.
So you mentioned that Apple and Google were very innovative, but then you also mentioned like Target and FedEx, and I never heard of them being called innovative. Like, what examples are there that would put them in the innovation sort of category?
So again, this is Forbes magazine is one who called these companies innovative, but certainly, I mean, Apple and Google for a long period now, they're considered to be, they're innovative tech companies. There's no question. It's why Apple is the biggest company in the world, is because they're so innovative. On the other hand, a company like Target and FedEx, what a lot of it has to do with is more recent, is how they essentially turn their companies. So again, if you compare FedEx to a company, the U.S. Postal Service, although it's connected to the government, it's still treated as its own company. And it's I think a lot has to do with compare and contrast. When you look at, I had United Airlines up there, if you compare that to a company like Southwest or some of these more innovative, and a lot has to do with the top of the company and how they approach the problems they're dealing with. But I can't personally give specific examples of FedEx and Target, but it is simply how they've transformed their companies, and they are now quite successful, and they're doing very well. For a while, these companies were amazing.
Can I answer that question?
No, of course, please.
Okay. The beauty is there are two components, revenue and costs. Okay. The neat thing that Target has done or Walmart has done is they brought the cost down dramatically. Before, as a shopkeeper, right, we would say, okay, I think they're going to buy so many bars of soap. Now companies like Target and Walmart, what they do is they have a computer tracking system. So the moment you go buy a bar of soap, the computer in the inventory says, hey, so-and-so has bought a bar, we need to replace that. So what they've done is they've become very efficient in how they carry inventory, which is a big cost for them. So FedEx and all these, they've done a tremendous job in offering services and how they control costs. Does that answer your question?
Yeah.
What kind of opportunities can you provide for students who are interested to pursue in that field? Do you have any mentorship program?
Yeah, I mean, so I know Shell has a number of programs, and Mark, who is doing the talk right now in the ACPIT, he's actually involved in Houston in one of these programs. Unfortunately, so I am involved, and of course, if people are interested, and there is, on the IMSA alumni webpage, they keep track of what companies, what industries people work for. I kind of leave it up to the administrators. But if there is an industry you're interested in and you don't know of anyone in that, talk to people at that level and ask, and they can see, are there any alumni? I hadn't realized there was anyone else in the oil industry before I showed up here today, and Southern Mark also works for Shell. But it's, check and see, ask if there are, because I'm more than happy to talk to people on the phone, to exchange emails, to explain what my industry is. There are programs, but unfortunately, they're more targeted. I mean, there's certainly not a lot of oil production in and around the world, so there are not going to be a lot of oil companies providing these sort of mentorships. But if people are interested, they're more than welcome to contact me. I'm sure it's not just me. I think almost all of us would be happy to field questions and answer any questions.
I have one more question.
So what is it, in your opinion, that makes people innovative? And are these people naturally innovative, or can it be taught to them? Can they be taught how to be innovative?
So again, I think it comes down to this point of creativity. I don't think people can be taught to be innovative. I think everyone's born innovative. I think you can teach innovation out of people. And in fact, over history, there has been cultures that try to do that, that try to form everyone into the same mold. But there is practice. I mean, you need to practice innovation to be successful. And that can be in anything you can do that. Again, that can be in your own day-to-day life. That can be in your efficiency and how you do your work. That can be SIR projects that you're working on.
but it's always having the drive to be innovative, always looking at something in a different way. Don't look at it like everyone else does. With practice, and that's what I feel I did. So the time I had here, when I was doing what we called my inquiry project at the time, those were the sort of things that I felt is what made me today as I like to think as an innovative person. So it's really practice, but no, you can't teach, but you can remove innovation from people. And that's more, I would say, the education of society.
And you get it, and can they get it back if they've been untaught?
Yeah, I mean, it's. I think it's certainly possible. I mean, I think with practice, people can become innovative. If you go 20 years and you've never been innovative, you simply do what you're told to do. I think people still can learn to be innovative. That's not a question. But I think, particularly when you look at creativity, children are very, very creative, and you can see as over time people become less and less creative. That's part of the real world. You have to grow up, but it's doing that. It's trying to keep yourself creative, trying to keep yourself innovative, and yes, just practice. I mean, people can certainly improve. That's no question. You can improve. So I think if you have no innovation, you can certainly improve.
All right, I got to grab stuff in, if that's okay.
Yes.
You're going to work with Dr. Don for a few more minutes.
Thank our speaker again.